It's a massive game for the Socceroos on Thursday night against Indonesia in Sydney, and it's a big window. Jacob Stevens and Christian Montagan. We're going to preview the Indonesia game before we think about China next week. And the biggest news for them, Jacob, has been their coach. Patrick Kluivert is a bit of a football name to bring into your National Association setup, and a little bit of controversial circumstances as well.
Yeah, but as far as I can tell, the majority of Indonesian fans were none too pleased when it was announced that former coach Shin Tae-yong was being dismissed from his role as head coach of Indonesia. He really sort of gained a lot of trust and support as head coach of the Indonesian national team over the last few years, and has got them playing some really solid, albeit defensive football, but they were finding results and being a bit of a nuisance for some of the better teams in Asia, which is something that Indonesia really hasn't been able to do over over its long history. So it sort of came out of nowhere that all of a sudden he was out, and that Indonesia were looking to appoint a European coach. The main angle and reason for that being that they wanted to make it easier for naturalized players to be able to come to the Indonesian team, which sort of reflects a lot of the sort of approaches that a number of Southeast Asian teams are making now, and even like the likes of China are doing this similar sort of thing with players, where they're looking afield to try and find people who they can bring into their side to up the level. So it seems like Indonesia are going down that route as well, which is why they've appointed Patrick Kluivert, but himself not somebody who necessarily would have been, I think, a first choice for a lot of people. He's not had a huge amount of head coaching experience. He's done a lot of assistant stuff. He was some form of coach for AZ Alkmaar in the Eredivisie. He then came to Brisbane and was assistant manager for the Roar for a season, I think 2009, 2010, and there's going to be a lot of references to the Brisbane Roar, I feel, in this video, because Shin Tae-yong as well.
It was only for a 2-week period, I believe, that Brisbane Roar.
Yeah, it was a very short period
It's on the CV.
But it's on the CV, and Shin Tae-yong actually finished his playing career at the Roar. He played one game for them in like 2005, and then became assistant coach for like 3 or 4 seasons after that. So and now, of course, I'm sure we'll mention him again at some point in this video, but Rafael Struijk, obviously a current Brisbane Roar player, so lots of ties to the Indonesian national team there. But no, I mean, he's bounced around Europe. He's done some roles for a number of Dutch clubs. He was manager for the FC20 under-21 side. He was sporting director for a matter of about a month at PSG. He's had roles in the youth academy at Barcelona, so he's really just sort of bounced around, and his most recent gig was with a Turkish club, Adana Demirspor, and he was head coach there for about, I think, like 20 games. I think he was only there for a season, and now he's taken this role with Indonesia. And from a lot of what I've been seeing online, and the rumour seems to be that he will be sort of the face of Indonesian football moving forwards, but that perhaps not necessarily actually going to be the one that's going to be tactically putting game plans in place and things like that. And he's more sort of there for motivation and to be that big draw card potentially for other foreign players to try and naturalise into the Indonesian team.
Interesting, because Christian, the whole naturalising players, it's been a big thing around Asia in the last 5 years or so, including Australia as well. We've done it with a lot of Scottish players in particular, but it is core to this Indonesian strategy as well, isn't it?
It is. It's interesting because obviously in the past they've sort of adopted this approach of wanting to focus a bit more on, adopting their own players right from Indonesia. And I actually did an interview last year. I mentioned it to you guys a couple of times already. This Indonesian who started up his own football academy over there, and he was saying how he disagrees with this whole, how these players aren't really born in Indonesia, but yet they're playing for the national team. It's like, it's not the Indonesia he knows, which is quite fascinating, really, because you do get those clashes, whether it be European countries where they get, South American imports coming over to play for your country. Some fans don't like it because they believe that if you're not born in the country or you don't have a deep connection, you really shouldn't be playing for them. So I guess it can be a bit divisive in that sense, but look, this is what Indonesia are going with. This is their new direction. And at the moment, they're only 1 point behind Australia, right? Like, this is their best chance ever to qualify for a World Cup. Like, you can sense that the fans are really buzzing, that they've got a real opportunity now. And it's a shame what's happened with this whole coaching situation, because as Jacob touched on, it seemed as though the fans are really on board with what was happening there. They were picking up some positive results. So let's see if Patrick Kluivert can make a bit of a difference. Obviously, it's a big name, but we've seen in the past big names don't necessarily translate into good coaches. So we'll have to wait and see.
They have a couple of things going for them coming into this picture, Jacob. Number one, they took a point off Australia in the last time they played. This was obviously an Indonesian home game.
Yeah.
But they've also just come off beating Saudi Arabia 2-0 with a red card involved as well. Like, coming in knowing you can do it against one of the biggest sides, and then you got the new manager bounce as well, right? There's a few things working in their favour.
I do agree with that, but then I also think that potentially this whole new manager bounce thing isn't going to be quite as effective in this situation because, it was really embedded what they were doing at that point, and with those results against Australia and Saudi Arabia with Shin Tae-yong and how he wanted to play football and the way that he set the team up, and they knew what they were doing because they'd been working at it for quite a while by that point. Whereas now, especially in international football, we saw it work with Popovich, to be fair, with the Socceroos against China, but it does feel like perhaps it's going to be a little bit more difficult because from everything that I've looked at, there is pretty significant differences between the way that Kluivert and his coaching staff will probably look to play versus the way that Shin Tae-yong had his teams lining up, and is a fundamental difference in sort of ideology in the way to play football. So whether it actually comes off or not is another thing, but I think in terms of morale boosting, those results are huge for Indonesia. That Australia draw in particular was a really good example of them being able to just shut down and frustrate much better opposition, and then to go and follow that up with a win against Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I mean, for the players themselves individually, it's going to be a huge confidence boost and hopefully something that they can carry forwards because there's definite glimpses we've seen from that side of them being a pretty good football team, and those results certainly suggest that perhaps they could come and upset Australia.
Any particular players, Christian, that we should be looking out for in this window?
Well, obviously the one you touched on is Rafael Struijk, because we all know of him. His time at Brisbane Roar, A-League fans are extremely familiar with him. So I expect him to start, but at the same time, you're not really going to expect a lot of goal-scoring chances in this game, right? Indonesia, their past few games, especially during World Cup qualifying and this ASEAN Championships that they played a few months back, they usually adopt either a back three or a back five system, right? And against the bigger sides, I've noticed, against the likes of Australia, Japan, Saudi Arabia, they tend to drop their wing backs more. So it's sort of a flat back five. So, I mean, the one player I am looking out for is a midfielder named Marcelinho Ferdinand, who actually scored both goals in that victory against Saudi Arabia. He seems to me like he can be the one who might be able to split the lines, get into more advanced positions when Indonesia don't have, I guess, many opportunities to press forward. Like, he's going to have to pick his moments, and he could be a player who could maybe stifle Australia when Indonesia do get their chances on the counter-attack. He may not have that much freedom, I guess, because I expect Indonesia to be a lot more compact in the midfield, where Australia like to build up possession and play out from the back. So that could be another thing to consider. But I was also looking at the suspensions, and one important thing to note here is that centre-back Justin Hubner, who plies his trade with Wolves in the Premier League, he'll be suspended because he picked up 2 yellow cards, I believe, against Saudi Arabia. It was 89th minute as well. They were 2-0 up. It was really unnecessary. So that's a big loss there for Indonesia. And they've also got their striker who tends to play with Rafael Struijk, if I pronounce it rightly. His name's Ragnar Oratamongon. I don't know if I pronounced it right. I apologise to Indonesian fans, but due to card accumulation, so he's going to be missing out of action as well. So, 2 big key outs for Indonesia heading into Thursday night, and it's whether they can, I guess, adapt to Kluivert's game style. We know, when new coaches come in, Jacob touched on it, it tends to be a new manager bounce, but I tend to see it the opposite way. Because of Indonesia having picked up a lot of positive results, I tend to doubt that the playing group were out of favour with the coach, or the dressing room was lost. Maybe behind the scenes something happened. We're not quite too sure, but it does seem like a strange decision. So Kluivert, he's going to have a bit of work to do if he wants to get a result away from home.
Very nice. Okay, let's have a look at the Australian team that we might expect to line up against Indonesia on Thursday night. I think the first thing to say is that despite all the defensive injuries, I think the number of defenders and midfielders picked in this squad kind of leads towards the fact that Popovich will stay with his kind of 5-2-3, if you want to describe it like that. Obviously, the wing backs are pretty versatile in the way they move up the field and become wingers at some point, right? But I think that structure will stay in place. We've got Joe Gauci out injured, so Matt Ryan is obviously a pretty much lock to start games that are must-wins, essentially. Vince Ruggiero did a really nice piece talking to him about being dropped by Joe Gauci, and one of the things he said was that Popovic actually broke one of his rules, and he's not really a kind of coach to go and explain decisions to individuals, but out of respect for Matt Ryan being the captain of the national team, he thought that was a place where that was appropriate. And, you know, Matt Ryan's gone away to Lens now, and he's getting regular football in a top 5 European league, so he'll be looking to reclaim his spot. A back three of Kai Rouse, Cam Burgess, and Jason Guerrier looks like the likely options for me. Then at the wing backs, you've got Jordy Boss out injured, so Aziz Behich and Lewis Miller seems like a lock. The midfield, Jacob, I think, is where you can start to throw a few question marks, because you got Jackson Irvine, who's captaining a Bundesliga team, but who he's paired with, I think, is interesting. You've got Nectar Triantis, who's been playing well as a very defensive-minded midfielder for Hibernian, and someone like Anthony Caceres, who probably does some of his better work, finding these really visionary passes further up the field. There's different options there, and I think it'll be telling which one Popper picks as to how he kind of wants to approach each game.
Yeah, and I think that it's also going to be heavily sort of focused on what Indonesia might look to do as well, and from what I've looked at, Kluivert's assistant coach Alex Pastor, he's very well known for having a really high pressing side, a lot of energy in the front line and in the midfield. So I think that what could happen is there's actually going to be a lot of transitional moments for Australia, and in the midfield, if you're going to have Irvine in there, I think you've got to have somebody who does his work a lot higher up the pitch than Irvine does. Have Irvine as that sort of that link up player, right, who you can get the ball to in the midfield to try and narrow the shape a little bit, but you need somebody who's a bit higher up in those transitional phases to be able to capitalize perhaps on some of the space that's going to open up in this Indonesia side if they go with a high press. So in terms of that, the options looking pretty limited, to be honest. You mentioned Caceres, but even then he does still play a little bit deeper. He prefers to be the one making that pass. We have seen Irvine play a little bit higher up, and he's scored quite a few goals for Australia now as well. And the season he's having in Germany as well is pretty phenomenal in terms of his goal contributions. So there's perhaps the option for him to play like a false 9 or as a 10, a bit higher up the pitch, and having somebody a little bit deeper who's going to be able to play those line-breaking balls a bit quicker and with a bit more intent, playing behind him, which I think is probably the more likely option here, given just the composition of the squad at this point in time. But then, of course, if that's not the way that Popovic wants to actually approach the game, if he would rather slow the game down and play with a lot of possession and just really bait Indonesia into pressing high and tire them out and then capitalise, well, then you've got plenty of good options who are those sort of ball-holding midfielders. You mentioned Nectar Triantis, I think, has been fantastic so far this season over in Scotland. He could be a really good option there. But yeah, you're right, Lockie. Sort of depending on who's picked, it's going to really change the way that Australia will look to play this game, because especially when they're limiting themselves with sort of that 5 at the back, even though 2 of them are wing backs, that doesn't leave you a whole lot of options in the midfield in terms of, you can have 3 players, you can have a double pivot, you can have you've got only the 2 guys there. So you've got to be able to make those choices based on the game plan that you have and the game plan the opposition has. So it's going to be definitely very interesting to see. And yeah, whether or not Irvine plays higher or lower up the pitch, it's going to really depend on who's next to him, I think.
Christian, final third. I think this could go so many different ways. A common sentiment, I think, would suggest that Cassini Yengi is the starting striker. I've just got a hint that Adam Taggart is going to start, because I think his inclusion in the squad, on pure form alone, he is not one of the best strikers that Australia has available right now in terms of how he's going in the A-League, especially when you compare him to someone like a Noah Botic, right? But I think he offers potentially an improvement on the Mitch Duke profile of striker that has been very familiar in the Australian camp recently, right? Someone who's going to run themselves into the ground, pressing, can be a real workhorse, can compete in the air, probably not quite as good as Boyle, Sorry, not Boyle. I'm getting ahead of myself. As Duke. But someone who offers a similar profile where someone like a Yengi, it's going to be a little bit different, right? Different to a Botic, all that kind of thing. And then you consider these wingers, right, that aren't really wingers. They tuck inside. They kind of play as 10s. I think Craig Goodwin has to start. He was really good actually on the right side, being able to cut in on his left foot. And then maybe it's Martin Boyle. Maybe those two players switch. But then the same kind of logic as why I'm picking Taggart is screaming at me that maybe Daniel Arzani will get a start. He probably didn't deserve it, but he played really well on the weekend. And one thing he said, if Daniel didn't play well the previous week, then he wouldn't be in the squad. Well, he's just probably gone and had a better game. Does that earn him actual game time in the starting 11?
Gosh, imagine the uproar if Arzani gets a start. That would be insane. You could be right. I mean, I don't know. I think if it's two up front, then it would be Yengi and Taggart. But obviously Popovic in the past is, he's gone for that one recognisable striker, right? Whether it be Yengi, whether it be Duke. So, if he does go for Taggart against an Indonesia side, who I guess, I don't see Australia being in a position where they're going to have to, hold the ball up a lot. They're going to be on the counter-attack. I see it the other way around, right? Australia should be on the front foot. They should be dominating. And I see this game perfectly suited for Yengi actually to start, with his pace, his dynamism, just to sort of break the lines. If it was against a Japan or a Saudi Arabia, for example, maybe Taggart could be an option that Popovic might be considering. And I'm sure he's going to get minutes off the bench regardless, even if he doesn't get the nod to start. But yeah, I think despite Yengi, I believe he hasn't even scored a goal yet this season. He might have one. He hasn't been in great form. So that would be a slight concern. But if I had to stick my neck out, I'd probably say Yengi to start. And then it depends obviously who plays out wide. Will it just be with the two wingers and the one sole striker? Goodwin, I agree, has to start. For me, I think we lost that during his suspension, I believe, in the last window, where we lost a lot of that creativity down on those flanks. So he's definitely one to come in. And then the other one, obviously, Nestor and Kunda, we can't put that out as a suggestion. He's not in the squad. So, Velupile, another option. I don't see him starting either. Marco Tilio, he's had a tremendous past few weeks for Melbourne City. Could he potentially get a nod? Who knows? So there are a few options that Popovic does have up his sleeve to utilise. Martin Boyle, probably with his experience, might get a start. So, there are options. So for Popovic, it's great that he's got a lot of chances to tweak things. And I guess on game day, he'll know the best possible formula to put out there.
Can I just jump in to say I'd be surprised to see Yengi just based on the fact that, and I could be reading this incorrectly, but I think he's got a suspension for this game anyway.
Does he?
I believe so. Transfer Market's saying that. They're saying he's got a red card suspension. So
red card suspension?
Yeah.
When did he get a red card?
Let's do
September 6th, 24.
September 6th.
And it's saying he hasn't served it. Now...
that was when he got it against Bahrain.
But hasn't he played since then? Or was he... Wait, no, that can't work. There's been 5 games since then.
Was he in the squad for him?
But does that matter?
Yeah, he's got to play. He has to play for it to be served. I thought he played.
Well, he can't play in a suspension.
No, but that's what I'm saying. He has to...
be selected? No, surely not. Not in international football.
I don't know.
All right. To be honest, I'm just going to cut that out because we're short on time.
But
okay. Jacob's thrown us off a bit.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw that pop up and I was like,
No.
They'll tell us if
that's
wrong.
weird.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Jacob, Christian, appreciate your time. It's going to be a big one on Thursday evening. Massive points on the line for both Indonesia and Australia, 2 and 3 in Group C of the AFC World Cup qualifying. So big ramifications on the line. It's going to be a hell of a game. And we're on the live stream as well, don't forget. So tune in for that, the watch along on YouTube. So it's going to be a good one. We'll see you there.